Hi, I'm Wilma Schenkels, and I'm the Chief Veterinary Officer with the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture, and I'm happy to provide an update on the current avian influenza situation. Avian influenza is a viral infection that affects wild birds as well as domestic poultry. Avian influenzas are divided into two categories: the low pathogenic avian influenza viruses, which often cause no symptoms or very mild disease, and the high pathogenic avian influenza viruses, which cause more severe disease with high mortality. The virus currently circulating is a highly pathogenic strain with high mortality rates. Wild birds, particularly waterfowl, are natural reservoirs of the disease, and they may carry a high-path avian influenza without showing any symptoms. Domestic poultry, particularly chickens and turkeys, are more susceptible to the disease. The current strain of avian influenza was introduced to North America through the Atlantic flyway, which is shown here in green. It was introduced in the fall of 2021, and as birds migrated north the following spring, we saw cases spread from east to west through the Mississippi, Central, and Pacific flyways. The virus is now present in all 4 North American flyways. The congregation of birds amplifies the virus, creating high-risk periods for disease. High-risk periods occur as the birds migrate in the spring and the fall, but resident waterfowl can also harbor the virus and result in outbreaks outside this time period. Bird migration patterns are monitored and can be viewed on the Birdcast website. The number of birds in flight at a particular time gives an indication of the risk. This snapshot from October 5th shows over 500 million birds in flight. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative track cases of avian influenza in Canada and report them on this website. The small blue dots are infected poultry farms, and small green dots are infected poultry deemed non-poultry or not commercial poultry. Red and orange dots include confirmed and suspected cases in wildlife. The orange suspected cases mean that the confirmatory testing has not been completed. And all these dots are occurring in the Atlantic flyway represented here in blue. Several other websites also report avian influenza cases. The United States Geographical Survey website reports cases across North America in both domestic and wild birds. As of October 5th, 2022, there have been 492 infected poultry sites in the United States, with over 46.9 million birds affected in 40 states. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency reports Canadian cases in domestic poultry by province. As of October 5th, 2022, there were a total of 73 currently infected premises and 86 premises that had been infected but have been released. This is a total of 159 affected premises with over 2.9 million birds. Numbers in both Canada and the US are increasing daily. The National Avian Influenza Wildlife Site reports wildlife detections in Canada. This site is updated regularly, but testing can be delayed and is limited. Reported positives are mainly seabirds, ducks, and geese. However, raptors are also frequently reported, as are some other bird species. The site also includes reports of affected mammals, including seals, foxes, skunks, and bears, which are presumably infected through the consumption of infected carcasses. With wild birds being carriers of high pathogenic avian influenza, the most important risk factor for domestic birds is their exposure to wild birds and their feces and respiratory excretions. Outdoor access, especially in close proximity to wetlands and migratory bird corridors, carries a high risk, as does proximity to areas with crops or short grass where wild birds feed or congregate. Locations that have resident waterfowl flocks are also hazardous. Exposure to infected domestic birds also pose a risk. Be aware of your proximity to other domestic flocks and avoid contact with other poultry or potentially contaminated bedding. The clinical signs of high pathogenic avian influenza are generally nonspecific. Flocks show a sudden and high mortality, and birds may be depressed or display neurologic signs. Affected birds often have hemorrhages on the hocks and swollen and congested wattles and combs. You may also see decreased egg production or production of soft-shelled eggs and diarrhea in infected birds. So why is avian influenza a concern? Most of the concerns with avian influenza are animal health related, as the virus causes high death losses, which translate into serious production and economic losses. Avian influenza also results in trade restrictions being placed on Canada from other countries. Other species of animals may also be infected with the virus. On the human health side, avian influenza is not a food safety risk, but there is a low risk of human disease in individuals who have close contact with infected birds. Virus mutation is also a concern with avian influenza. Low pathogenic avian influenza viruses can mutate into high pathogenic avian influenza strains, and strains can mutate to become more infective or to affect different species. Because of those concerns, avian influenza is a reportable disease in domestic poultry under the Federal Health of Animals Act, and it must be reported to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. You can contact CFIA at the Nova Scotia Regional Office, phone number 902-536-1010, or the Atlantic Hotline, 1-506-381-7683. The Department of Natural Resources and Renewables has also set up a toll-free number to report sick or dead wild birds. That number is 1-800-565-2224. Infections of avian influenza must be reported to the CFIA, who then responds to control the disease. CFIA's response includes confirmation of the disease through diagnostic testing. Upon confirmation of the disease, they report it to the World Organization of Animal Health. They will then conduct an investigation of the infected premise. They will quarantine the infected premise and declare a control zone surrounding that premise. Movement controls and disease surveillance will be in place within that zone. Infected premises will need to depopulate and dispose of birds under CFIA guidance. Premises will also need to be cleaned and disinfected under CFIA guidance. As a poultry owner, you do have some responsibilities. First of all, if you are suspicious your birds are infected, you must report this to CFIA. You will then be required to contribute to the investigation by providing a site map, flock health records, and purchase and movement records for any feed, bedding, or poultry that have moved on or off your farm in the last little while. A visitor log of human movements will also be required. As an owner, you are also responsible to carry out quarantine, destruction and disposal, and cleaning and disinfection as required by CFIA. As a bird owner, preventing infection is your key responsibility. Please follow good biosecurity to prevent your birds from becoming infected.